Welcome to tonight's SRP seminar from the Studies in Interreligious Relations in Plural Societies program, the SRP at the S. Rajaratnam School, Nanyang Technological University. Now, tonight we're being joined by a guest from the Philippines who happens to be currently in the United States of America. This is Professor Cornelio, Jayeel Cornelio. He is Professor of Development Studies at the Ateneo University in the Philippines, but currently he is on sabbatical in the Louisville University in the USA, and that's where he is joining us from tonight. You have the rest of his biographical details in the introduction to this, and of course the title. He's talking to us about how Pentecostal churches and megachurches have moved towards a model of well-being in what they do. So, Jayeel, if I can hand over to you, please, for tonight's webinar talk, and he'll talk about 45 minutes on this. You can put your questions into the chat, which is enabled, and we'll then sort of go through the Q&A at the end after Jayeel has talked to us about 45 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much for making this happen. And to all our friends and colleagues at RSIS and TU, really appreciate that you took time to make this happen. And to everybody who is here, I know it's already 8 o'clock in the evening in Singapore. It's not a good time to be attending a webinar, but you decided to do this anyway. And so I just hope that this will be a fruitful session for all of us. Obviously, I'm going to be reading from a script, and I'm going to be sharing my PowerPoint slides in a bit. But I also want this to be as conversational as possible, folks. So if you do have questions already that you want to put in the chat box, I'd be happy to entertain them as I go along. If not, we can have Luca take over later on during the open forum. So just give me maybe 45 minutes tops to share what I have to share about my work, megachurch Christianity around the world, looking at the Philippines, but also different examples, certainly in Singapore as well, and certainly here in the US as well. Once again, I really appreciate that you all took time to be here to join us. Even though I know that it's already getting late. I hope that you've had your dinner and that you're just enjoying this webinar. Okay, well-being in megachurches, from healing to personal fulfillment. The therapeutic culture is alive and well in megachurches around the world. From Lakewood in the United States to New Creation in Singapore, the therapeutic culture celebrates personal well-being and individual prosperity. Joel Osteen, for example, begins his best-selling book with the following claim: no matter where you are or what challenges you are facing, you can enjoy your life right now. The pastor of Lakewood Church, one of the largest congregations in the United States, then goes on to enumerate practical steps in achieving life enjoyment. He wants readers to develop a healthy self-image, let go of the past, and choose to be happy. Many of us are aware of this book, I bet. Joseph Prince, similarly, has a message of hope for those who are facing their own challenges in life. The pastor of New Creation Church in Singapore, one of the largest, proclaims a grace revolution, one in which precious lives are being transformed, marriages are being restored, the sick are being healed, and many are being freed from the bondage of legalism. Again, I understand that some of you might even be aware of these words from Joseph Prince himself. Whereas Osteen's message is enjoyment of life, Prince is restoration. Either way, both point to the individual's well-being. So that's Joel Osteen on your screen right now. Their therapeutic message celebrates the individual as God's favored. But upon the individual, too, is the ultimate responsibility to achieve well-being. So it's a key point that I am making in this presentation. Yes, it's favor of God, but it's also the burden of the individual. Therapeutic interventions, after all, whether in counseling or human resource management, rely on personal responsibility to be successful. Thus, Osteen, the man on the screen, calls on people to take charge of their situation and be the architects of change in their own lives. He is convinced that the only way to achieve your best life now, as the title of his book puts it, is to adopt a positive mindset and keep confessing that the future ahead is bright. You gotta confess it. You gotta name it. You gotta claim it. Very basic prosperity gospel. We'll get to that in a bit. If one follows Osteen's advice, the pastor suggests, material blessings will follow. Even Joseph Prince's book follows the same formula, calling on his readers to grow in boldness and confidence, speak the language of faith. Thus, while Prince preaches grace for every individual, his theology emphasizes individual responsibility as well. So the big question is, so that's Joseph Prince, we all know him. What is the shape of therapeutic Christianity in megachurches? What is the shape of therapeutic Christianity, well-being Christianity, if you will, in megachurches? And how different might it be from earlier theologies embraced by megachurches? How different might it be from older forms of therapeutic Christianity? In this talk, I will explain that the central tenet of the therapeutic culture in megachurches is well-being. And it has three areas, my friends. Three areas: healing, material prosperity, and personal fulfillment. Healing, material prosperity, and personal fulfillment. The first two, healing and prosperity, they characterize the earlier forms of the prosperity gospel. We all know them. Healing, prosperity, I will get to them in a bit, but for me, those constitute the old prosperity gospel. But as I will argue in the rest of the talk, the third area, self-fulfillment or personal fulfillment, is a more recent development. It is expressed in terms of relationships, purpose, and inspiration. I'll be sharing this with you later on. Its rise in megachurches, I will share this with you. I'll be a little technical here now. The rise of therapeutic culture in megachurches is explained by what we call the marketization of religion, a process in which the logic of neoliberalism increasingly, or free market, if you will, increasingly shapes religious life. I will show that it gains traction not just in advanced societies or wealthy countries like Singapore or the US, but also among megachurches in the global south because of the rise of the aspirational middle class, even if many of them may be in precarious situations. In this light, the older form of the prosperity gospel, which focus only on naming and claiming, believing, having strong faith, has evolved into what we call the prosperity ethic, involving the acquisition of skills for personal fulfillment and for upward mobility. I will end with some critical reflections. By displacing the theology of suffering, does the therapeutic culture ultimately make poverty a problem of the individual? A quick note on what this talk refers to as megachurches. Megachurches, especially here in the United States, may be classified according to their denominational affiliations or theological alignments. Many of them might even consider themselves independent or unaffiliated, even if their preaching largely reflects charismatic and evangelical persuasions. The prosperity gospel and the therapeutic culture to which this talk pays attention is generally to be found in these charismatic megachurches. In other contexts like Africa, and I'll be also citing examples from Africa, megachurches may also be classified according to their goods of salvation, quote unquote. While many might be known for prosperity-oriented teachings, others attract people who need healing and deliverance. Regardless, what I'm saying is that the therapeutic culture is found in megachurches around the world in varying degrees, and it's just a matter of emphasis. Some churches might be emphasizing healing, but just the same, present in them is the desire for self-fulfillment. So, Jayeel, what exactly do we mean by this therapeutic culture? Here we go. The therapeutic culture of megachurches, as you see on your screen, is pervasive in the discourse that megachurches espouse. It is found in a variety of sources, okay? It's not just in the preachings of the pastors. It's not just in the books, but it's also in the little things. For example, the Bible study guides, the devotional booklets, the materials that you find when you enter or exit the hallway, and obviously also the songs that they produce. That's why in the course of my presentation tonight, I'll be sharing with you some snippets from what I have gathered from these materials. This discourse, the therapeutic culture, is largely introspective, defining how we make sense of who we are. Instrumental in this regard are values, ideals, and stories pastors use to assess their own and their audience's fortunes and prospects. Stories are very, very important in this regard. At the same time, the therapy, so it's not just prescriptive, folks, but it is also diagnostic. The therapeutic culture examines and treats problems of the self and the barriers to the attainment of personal well-being. These problems are usually in your desires or in your emotions. Feel bad? What do we do about it? They could also reside in one's memory, maybe a thing of the past. Megachurches highlight these areas as needing deliverance and restoration. So, the pursuit of individual well-being sums up the therapeutic culture of megachurches, expressed in three ways: healing, material prosperity, self-fulfillment. Healing and material prosperity constitute what is conventionally known as the prosperity gospel. We know this, long embraced by megachurches and charismatic congregations. To this too, I add self-fulfillment. So I will get to that in a bit. For this talk, I will show how these three are ultimately tied to well-being. Let's start with the first one. I understand that some folks are coming a few minutes into the presentation. I hope that you're able to catch up, but good evening to you all. Good morning from my side. Okay, let's start with healing. Healing is the first aspect of the therapeutic culture. If you don't have a copy of this book, better check it out. Really, really interesting stuff over here. Healing is to be especially expected in charismatic megachurches. One of the central tenets of Pentecostalism and charismatic Christianity is the ever-present move of the Holy Spirit, particularly in the form of spectacular signs and wonders. While healing is often oriented toward physical ailments, it encompasses mental and emotional turmoil as well. A variety of practices are involved in divine healing, such as the laying on of hands, positive confession, and even exorcism. Again, many of us here in this room might be familiar with this already. In some congregations, the use of oil or cloth mediates divine healing. When I was still living in Singapore, I did my grad school, and in Singapore, I attended one of the older charismatic churches in Singapore along Commonwealth Avenue, and saw that they would still use a lot of oil and cloth for divine healing. Quite interesting. Whatever the mode of its transmission, megachurch pastors explain healing as God's will for people. But for healing to be activated, one needs to have faith. You need to have faith, folks, and act on the expectation that the person already has it. For preachers like Kenneth Hagin here in the United States, he is the key proponent of the word of faith movement. That's where it all began, if you think about it. Exercising faith is believing that what is asked is yours. So even if you don't have your healing yet, just believe that it's there already. It's the faith that counts. Part of cultivating this faith involves personal and collective rituals. At Lakewood Church, Joel Osteen's listeners are typically reminded to confess God's promises of healing. Just keep confessing it and keep declaring that you are healed and healthy. For the members of New Creation Church, Holy Communion, this is the book that you're seeing right now, is not a ritual to be observed, but a blessing to be received. Joseph Prince explains that while the wine represents forgiveness, the bread is for one's healing. At this point, it needs to be noted that the emphasis on faith varies across megachurches. It varies across megachurches. Others might suggest that divine healing needs God's intervention first and foremost. Thus, they prefer to refer to it as divine healing instead of faith healing. They don't think that faith is what matters here, but just the same, belief still matters. The therapeutic premise of healing is that illnesses are a barrier to well-being. The long-standing charismatic view is instructive here. For Oral Roberts, another stalwart of divine healing in the 20th century, illnesses are neither from God nor are they sent as punishment from the devil. Or they sent as punishment by God. Instead, illnesses are from the devil. This is quite a common discourse that you find among many churches. It comes from the devil. People become vulnerable to the schemes of the devil if their lives are not in harmony with God and God's will. In South Korea, megachurches like Yoido, Full Gospel Church, some of us are familiar with Yoido as the biggest megachurch in the world. They link sickness and sin and disease to sin. For David Yonggi Cho, Yoido's founding pastor, disease and death entered the world after the fall of humanity. Thus, the only way to come out of infirmity is through repentance by way of confession, forgiveness, and holiness. Other churches like Lakewood and New Creation may not subscribe to the link between sin and physical illnesses. To them, it's not about sin. Nevertheless, they all agree that diseases are a demonic attack. That illnesses are a demonic attack is taken seriously in other contexts. For this reason, churches like Liberty Gospel Church in Nigeria, they specialize in deliverance ministries. It has congregations all over Africa, and it's headed by Helen Okpabio, who describes herself as a former witch. Another prominent megachurch that embraces this view is Synagogue Church of All Nations, or SCOAN, based in Lagos. Its head, TB Joshua, and again, interesting, fascinating to be watching his YouTube videos. Its head, TB Joshua, is most controversial for claiming to be able to heal the most impossible illnesses, including even AIDS, or HIV. So that's healing for you folks. I'm not going to dwell on that because many of us are already familiar with this. We can have conversations about it later on, if you will. The second aspect of the therapeutic culture that I am describing in this presentation is what we call material prosperity. Material prosperity. I'm going to talk about this guy that you see on your screen shortly. Closely linked to health and is wealth. Both come together in the prosperity gospel, often found in charismatic congregations and embraced as a dominant theme of megachurch teachings. In these teachings, prosperity is taken to include different aspects of life, including physical, emotional, and spiritual. Although prosperity has many dimensions, too often the material aspect is disproportionately emphasized. There are many variations of the prosperity gospel, usually based on fine theological nuances, such as what prosperity might mean, who might be able to access it, who might attain it, and to what end must one acquire wealth. Often, however, the prosperity gospel associated with one strand of teaching that claims that apart from salvation, believers are promised healing and material prosperity by the scriptures. This view is based on the holistic ministry of Christ, so the theology goes, and the many other passages in the Bible that point to bodily and material blessings as God's will for people. Joel Osteen is perhaps the most famous contemporary figure that embraces this view. His books exhort his readers to achieve their dreams and live to their full potential. Drawing on a content analysis of his best-selling books, there's a scholar called Mundy. He traces Osteen's theology of money and consumption. For him, God does not simply want his people to get by with his basic things. Instead, according to Joel Osteen, God gives them armloads of blessings, explosive blessings, floods of favor, and a barnyard of blessings. So, adequacy is not the thing. It's overflowing blessings. They are what matters. They are what matter. Thus, he believes that God wants to give people not only what they need, but also what they want, including luxuries. His theological basis is that God is more than enough. The guy that you see on your screen right now, also fascinating, is called Emmanuel Makandiwa. Emmanuel Makandiwa of the United Family International Church, UFIC. And he agrees. He agrees with Joel Osteen. In fact, Makandiwa, described as the face of the prosperity gospel in Zimbabwe, believes that God has, quote, predestined his children to be wealthy. Fascinating use of a theological concept, predestination, but uses it in relation to wealth. Those of us who grew up in Protestant Calvinist traditions would know that predestination would refer to something else. But in the case of Makandiwa, predestination has to do with wealth. Much of what is articulated as a prosperity gospel is found in the sermons and writings of megachurch leaders. But the emphasis on prosperity is discernible too in other aspects of megachurch life. So obviously, we get them from their books, we get them from their sermons. But here, I am going to invite you to also try to analyze the other elements or aspects of megachurch life. For example, you can take a look at the services and how they are run in the massive buildings that they construct. Their productions have the look and quality of television commercials, observes another sociologist, George Sanders, because that is what they essentially were. Advertisements designed to elicit participation, unquote. It is thus fitting for these megachurches to carry triumphalist names too. The names also matter. The two largest megachurches in Africa are called Winners Chapel and Omega Power Ministries, both located in Nigeria. In the Philippines, my home country, Victory, as you see on your screen, is the largest with 65,000 members attending its weekly services across different satellite churches around the Philippines. In Australia and New Zealand, Victory Life and Destiny Church are notable megachurches. So what I'm saying is that you from the buildings that they construct, to the songs that they sing, to the very names that they carry, all you find are triumphalist statements, if you will. Victory, destiny, omega power, that sort of thing. The source megachurches produce are also a powerful conduit of their prosperity preaching. This is the case especially given their transnational connections around the world, making it easy for local congregations to use their compositions. One example of a prosperity-oriented song is by Shirley Caesar, an American gospel singer. I cannot sing it, but this is a one sentence from the lyrics. The bills are due, and your health is failing too. God is concerned, and is working it out for you. With her husband, Caesar co-pastored Mount Calvary Word of Faith Church in North Carolina until 2014. In Hillsong's Back to Eden, another song, one finds many of the same convictions. Those of us who came of age in the 2000s, we would be familiar with Darlene Sheck from Hillsong. And one of her most famous songs is All Things Are Possible. In it, Hillsong Sydney's former worship pastor sings, When I'm weak, you make me strong. When I'm poor, I know I'm rich. The theme of prosperity, so songs are also a powerful conduits of a victory, triumphalist theology that celebrates health, wealth, material prosperity, and all that. I mean, just to drive home the point, folks, it's not in my script, but just to drive home my point, just think about it. Those of you who come from Catholic backgrounds, most of the time, you won't find churches named after these triumphalist claims. In the Philippines, for example, there's a church where I grew up, in the city where I grew up. It's called the Five Wounds of Christ. Many of these churches are named after images of suffering, you know, or pain, which obviously is also there at the heart of Catholic theology. So it's a very interesting contrast that you find, say, in megachurches. You will be hard pressed to find, in other words, a megachurch that is named after an image that evokes suffering or pain. I don't think there's anything like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe there is. But from what I have gathered, it's always about destiny, victory, power, and so forth. The theme of prosperity may be located in the wider therapeutic culture of well-being. Okay, theologically, megachurch pastors invoke shalom, a Hebrew word connoting psychological, social, spiritual, and physical wholeness. Joseph Prince takes it one step further by making well-being the linchpin of his grace theology. This is what he has to say. It's on your screen right now. If you don't preach pure, unadulterated grace, people's lives will never be gloriously blessed and gloriously transformed. If you don't preach unadulterated grace, people's lives will never be gloriously blessed and gloriously transformed. Joseph Prince. Thus, luxury is what he asks his audience to name and claim. So Jayeel, okay, so it's all about that, victory and all that. How then do these megachurches account for poverty? Okay, what's poverty like? What's the theology? There's a theology of grace, there's a theology of victory. What's the theology of poverty, Jayeel? Interesting question. I'll try to give an answer. In their view, there is, for one, a demonic dimension to poverty. As with illnesses, some megachurch pastors refer to poverty as a demonic attack, which Christ's resurrection has supposedly ended. No less than UFIC's Makandiwa in Zimbabwe, this guy over here, no less than this guy claims that poverty is in fact a demon. It's not just a demonic attack, it's a demon. Others, however, appeal to a person's mindset. There's a book that you might be interested to read. It's called Blessed by Kate Bowler. In her History of the Prosperity Gospel in the United States, Kate Bowler writes about the work of Charles and Caroline Harrow, pastors of the Full Gospel Christian Church, FGCC, in California. Apart from preaching positive confession, they also believe that vocational skills were necessary to help Black men shake the welfare mentality and help rebuild the collapsed family structure among the poor. To help Black men shake the welfare mentality and help rebuild the collapsed family structure among the poor. Noticeable here is the equation that they make between Black men, welfare mentality, dysfunctional families. In the Philippines, there are similar observations about megachurch preachers who have financial consultants as well. Chinky Tan, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a big name in the preaching circuit, but also in the financial advice circuit in the Philippines. I'm very sure that he has been to Singapore so many times to speak before the Filipino migrant workers in the city-state. There are similar observations, you know. In fact, Chinky Tan is also a preacher of Victory, the church that I showed you, the photo of which I showed you just now. And he's known outside the evangelical community as a financial expert. In his many writings, he calls out what he calls the poverty mindset of Filipinos. He then offers practical ways to get out of it and build financial skills. Ultimately, the prosperity gospel espoused by megachurches relies on individuals to achieve their well-being. This is why one can argue that megachurches, from the songs that they produce to the massive conferences that they organize, have become an important marker of aspiration and upward mobility. This is the case too in places like Singapore. The growth of megachurches coincided with the economic growth of the city-state. The values espoused by the state, such as hard work, upward mobility, and the acquisition of English as a global skill, find their affinity in the prosperity gospel taught and practiced by Singaporean megachurches. So that's number two. So we've gone through two, folks. The first one is healing. The second one, material prosperity. We've unpacked them. We're now going to turn to the third one. And this, I suppose, will have the emphasis of my presentation. We're halfway through, and I hope that you're still with us here. And again, thanks to everyone who's joined us. Some of you who have joined us late into the presentation, I hope you're able to catch up nevertheless. The third one is called self-fulfillment. This is the third and the last element of what I call the therapeutic culture of megachurch Christianity. Health and wealth are two of the central elements of the prosperity gospel. As discussed previously, the prosperity gospel often preaches and depends on unwavering belief and repetitive confession, among other practices, as enactments of faith to activate the power of the Holy Spirit. For this reason, the prosperity gospel clearly builds on principles of the New Thought movement in the 19th century and Pentecostalism in the 20th century. Those of you who are interested in the origins of name it and claim it, you have to go back all the way to the 19th century. It's called the New Thought movement. Those of us who came of age in the 1980s, you might remember books like The Power of Positive Thinking and so forth. That is a direct descendant of the New Thought movement, if you will. To this day, many megachurches around the world embrace the prosperity gospel as a prominent feature of their sermons and practices. This is even if some of them do not wish, this is interesting, even if some of them do not wish to be formally identified with the prosperity label because of its negative connotations. In recent years, scholars like myself who have been observing megachurches, we have noticed shifts in emphasis among megachurches. While health and wealth are still staples in their preaching, books, and music, motivational themes and practical tips are becoming equally prominent, if not more. These messages address people's desires to be self-fulfilled in the areas of relationships, career, personal meaning. They do not necessarily displace conventional Pentecostalism, Pentecostal sermons about, say, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But, their prominence is notable as part of the wider therapeutic culture that contemporary megachurches embrace. In fact, in their mutual orientation toward individual well-being, one finds an affinity between self-fulfillment and the prosperity gospel. Give us examples, Jayeel. Motivational speeches delivered from the pulpit are turning out to be one of the greatest attractions of these megachurches. This is why whoever the pastor is plays a central role. It's if you think about it, very personality-driven, but for an obvious reason. For their audiences, not only do their pastors make Christianity relatable through motivational speeches about facing struggles, they can deflect accusations that they are profit-driven churches. They themselves are the story. The pastors themselves are the story. In the words of one of Butler's interlocutors for her doctoral dissertation on the American prosperity gospel, these are the words of one of her interlocutors. Money can buy many things, but not those. I know prosperity churches can be criticized for their messages being too light, too shallow, but I would rather hear a message to encourage me and push me along life's road. For this, many of us would readily think of Joel Osteen. Osteen's audience at Lakewood echoes similar sentiments. They are attracted to his motivational messages that help them improve personally and professionally. These megachurches, in other words, preach messages of self-help, enabling individuals to find meaning in whatever they do and inspiration to fulfill what they believe to be their destiny. Let me say that again. These megachurches preach messages of self-help, in effect, enabling individuals to find meaning in whatever they do and inspiration to fulfill what they believe to be their destiny. Nowhere has the message of self-help been more prominent, at least in the past 2 or 3 decades, than in the writings of Saddleback Church's Rick Warren, The Purpose-Driven Life, which advocates a faith-based approach to the realization of the self's ability to foster positive changes in one's life through the cultivation of individualized meaning. For Warren, a person cultivates individualized meaning by aiming to become a better version of oneself. PDL, Purpose-Driven Life, frames this in terms of character development. Not naming it and claiming it, but really just part of an set of skills for character development, patterned after the example of Christ. But you have to commit to it intentionally. Why? Because it's not just the book. There are videos, there are programs that accompany the book. The whole enterprise of self-help that PDL espouses is also consumption-based, relying on personal commitment. So, okay, we're drawing this to a close now, folks. Health, wealth, and self-fulfillment constitute the therapeutic culture of well-being found in megachurches today. In this light, megachurches parallel the therapeutic work of support groups, confessional talk shows, and counseling centers. If you think about it, they're cut from the same cloth, if you think about it. Confessional talk shows, Oprah Winfrey, counseling centers, therapy. And this is also personal to me because I myself have undergone therapy. I see the resonances. I really do. Together, many of you might see the resonances. Together, these institutions produce but also reinforce the cultural ethos for self-help and well-being. But what might set apart megachurches from these other institutions is the way they provide religious justification for well-being. And it's powerful. It is, as purported by these megachurches, God's will for people to be wealthy, healthy, happy. Wealthy, healthy, happy. That this message is articulated by their pastors, who often occupy central roles in these megachurches, makes it unassailable. Usually, even the life stories of these pastors attest to the validity of the claims they make. This is why they gotta look well. They gotta look very happy. That's why their photos have to be on the book, on the cover or the back cover of the book. In this light, the therapeutic discourse is a form of pastoral power. From this point of view, framing health, wealth, and self-fulfillment in terms of therapeutic culture is one way of making sense of how the prosperity gospel has now evolved. Useful in this regard is what I have written about with Aaron Medina. This is the article that you're seeing on your screen as the new prosperity gospel. It's open access. Please feel free to download it if you're interested. You can find it in the journal Pneuma, a journal dedicated to the study of Pentecostalism. We call it the prosperity ethic. By offering a message that combines spiritual renewal, wealth creation, and happiness, the new prosperity gospel, which we call the prosperity ethic, attempts to reinvent well-being from one that is collectively attained to one that is individualist, faith-based, and work-oriented. Here, it is important to distinguish this therapeutic culture from the old form of the prosperity gospel. Whereas the latter is miracle-oriented, the prosperity ethic banks on practical skills. I got to emphasize this, folks. Practical skills to achieve well-being. This much is true. This much is true in the way the contemporary megachurches sacralize self-help. While unwavering belief and repetitive confession still matter, megachurch preachers call on their followers to acquire practical skills to develop themselves. Rick Warren's purpose-driven life, as mentioned previously, asks his readers to discover their place in the world and act on it. But self-help is also about overcoming their inadequacies, usually in the form of poverty. Based on our work in the Philippines, in this article, Erin and I used the writings of Chinky Tan and another preacher called Bo Sanchez to argue our case. Chinky Tan exhorts his readers and listeners to abandon a poverty mindset, which I already mentioned, and invest in every opportunity to acquire financial skills. These include joining mentoring programs, learning the stock market, and reading books about financial literacy. That's all part of your self-help. What then accounts for the rise of the therapeutic culture in megachurches, Jayeel? It is, for one, embedded in wider cultural shifts. While discipline and self-sacrifice characterized the ideal self in the 19th century, these notions became mere personality in the 20th century. Self-realization and fulfillment replaced discipline as virtues of the ideal self. So now it's no longer about discipline. It's also about aspiring for authenticity. The cultivation of the self has become a persistent reflexive project anchored upon a consumerist lifestyle. Just to acknowledge Nasir, I see the question. Let's entertain them. This is a very good question, Nasir. Let's talk about it in a bit. Good point there. Accompanying these shifts is the rise. So here's one quote from another scholar about the cultivation of the self. The emphasis on the self, according to George Sanders, the emphasis on the self as a never finished entity corresponds to a consumer ethos that allows for limitless consumption and meanwhile encourages the individual to pursue employment in avenues that offer endlessly deferred promises of self-fulfillment and success. I thought this was a really powerful statement, to a certain extent, even a criticism about self-help. Not just within the megachurch Christianity, George Sanders doesn't talk about that. It's really talking about the wider ethos around the world today. It's about the emphasis on the self. In a way, it's a never-ending cycle. You're always trying to improve yourself, and you will never get to perfection. Accompanying these shifts is the rise of psychology as an influential discipline in schools and workplace. We're about to end now, folks. These shifts have been consequential on how megachurches, as market-sensitive institutions, perceive and reorient themselves. Megachurches that preach personal and relational purpose are doing exactly that, meeting what they believe are the needs of their audiences. The caveat, of course, is that the pursuit of health, wealth, and happiness becomes a never-ending process, one that will necessitate megachurches to continue reinventing themselves. This space for continuous reinvention is what drives megachurches to grow and thrive, both in number and in what it offers its audiences. It never ends. One thing I really am fascinated by, but also I wonder if they ever get tired doing it, is the never-ending innovations that you see in megachurches, the themes that they identify for the entire year, the preaching themes, the activities, the camps, the youth camps, and so on and so forth. And interestingly, because megachurches are very influential, they set the standard for smaller congregations around the world. You see this certainly in Singapore, but you see this certainly in places like the Philippines or Thailand, where smaller Christian churches try to emulate megachurches, the pattern of megachurches. So which is why it's very important to talk about megachurches as the ones that set the tone. As Percy puts it, the megachurch's approach to mission is pathological. It's a powerful word that he uses. Healing and repairing what has gone wrong. The therapeutic culture of well-being found in megachurches is precisely that, pathological. The marketization of society has had an effect too on religious life around the world. Here we draw this to a close. In this light, megachurches behave like any corporation, entities providing services in a competitive religious marketplace. Whether in North America or in Southeast Asia, a megachurch must know its audience and address its needs, casting its mission as the provision of profitable services meeting the individual needs of spiritual consumers in the new global market regime. Class, of course, is crucial here, class, but a factor that I believe needs to be interrogated as well. While the many scholars in the literature invoke the expansion of the middle class to account for the success of megachurches in different places, the reality, as I have discussed earlier, is a bit more complex. The condition of the middle class varies from society to society. In some contexts, the middle class is precarious. In the Philippines, for example, sometimes you're middle class, sometimes you're not middle class, sometimes you're poor because of economic shocks. This is why in these places, the acquisition of skills, invest in the stock market, do not just put them in the bank, acquire new skills, etc., etc. These are corrective mechanisms, if you will, for the upwardly mobile but precarious audiences. Upwardly mobile but precarious to help them protect their wealth. And of course, all of it is justified by a Christian perspective, namely that God wants you to have your well-being. Okay, now in conclusion, the prosperity gospel in terms of, okay, I'm going to turn off my screen now. I'm seeing the questions coming in. Thank you so much. The prosperity gospel, folks, in terms of health and wealth, had been the long-standing theological character of megachurches. But with the rise of self-fulfillment, the emerging shape of theology propagated by megachurches around the world is increasingly therapeutic, even pathological, never-ending diagnosis of what's wrong with me and what else can I do. Is the therapeutic culture of megachurches new? In a way, Jayeel, this is not new. Much of the theology of health and wealth has been catered to the needs of aspirational, if precarious audiences, and many of our scholars in Singapore have said the same thing. But on the contrary, we can also say that this is new. This is certainly the case given the rise of the therapeutic culture at large, often correlated with the expansion of psychology in the 20th century. Since the 1980s, think about it, the terminologies of self-esteem, counseling have become widely used, mental health, even in schools, even in my university. And right now, I'm here at the University of Louisville. Mental health is a big deal. Certainly in my university, Ateneo in the Philippines. Therapeutic intervention also became standards in workplaces. Often, religion is left out in these historical overviews, but what we are seeing, as I have shown you here in this presentation, is that megachurches, in fact, are playing a central role in legitimizing this wider therapeutic culture. Megachurches demonstrate the ability of religion to assert itself at a time when many scholars assume that it would lose influence via either secularization or the rise of individualism. Finally, megachurches as global products are not only addressing needs, they are also actively creating them. This is how they are instrumental in reinforcing the therapeutic culture. Sermons, music, literature, books, devotional guides, Bibles that they sponsor, they are creating particular theological standards that set them apart from other Christian churches, and then they become the examples. And they're readily adopted by smaller congregations in the global south. Everybody wants to become like this megachurch or like that megachurch. Nobody wants to become like that mainline denomination, like that small church. The megachurch has become the standard in and of itself. Think about this. Very telling is the fact that the theology of suffering or liberation theology, which used to dominate theological thought in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, has been drowned out. Liberation theology, for example. Such displacement, of course, raises scholarly, and these are the critical questions that I'm posing upon you. I know you're asking me questions, but I leave you with some questions also. They raise ethical questions. First, the therapeutic culture these megachurches embrace instills an individual-focused, problem-solving mindset. This psychology has taken roots particularly in highly consumerist societies. But in highly unequal societies, it demonizes poverty as the problem of the lazy individual. Theologians of suffering, by contrast, saw poverty as a result of oppressive structures. Second, undergirding the therapeutic message is a growth mindset, whether referring to the individuals these preachers attract or the megachurches they represent. As they expand in highly unequal societies, how much of the promise of your best life now is making a social impact? Is it really making a difference at large? Perhaps for attracting only the aspirational, even if precarious middle class, their therapeutic message is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I end there, and I really thank you so much for your active participation. Thank you. Luca, back to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jayeel. That was a really excellent presentation. It helps us make sense of so many interesting trends we're seeing in megachurches. For everybody else, I'm Luca. I'm a senior analyst with the SRP program, working with Paul in particular. And I'm going to take the Q&A session. I can see there's so many good questions coming in already, but I will, if it's all right, just exercise my liberty as a moderator to ask you one question first. And then we'll get through the others as well. Hopefully, we have a good 40 minutes. So one thing that struck me was it would seem that potentially the emphasis on sort of personal responsibility regarding material prosperity and sort of fulfillment more generally could dovetail quite nicely with efforts, maybe political efforts, to limit or prevent kind of welfare on a fiscal or, kind of macro level, welfare spending and so on. And I'm just kind of wondering whether globally you see any evidence of that Christian message being used to those ends.
Luca, why are you asking this? Can you explain that? I just want to know where you're coming from.
It's just really. I guess I'm interested in particular in the social impact of trends in Christianity, and so I'm quite interested in the way that like theological messages could actually have very practical influences. And I suppose, certainly, I think I'd leave it there, and then
Yeah. No, I hear you. So you're looking at how these theological reflections, how these theological messages make an impact on the political contexts where they are. Is that a question? Did I get it right?
Yes.
There
are already, I suppose, a lot of arguments against kind of spending on the needy and in lots of the international context that you've mentioned. And so if you were to have also religious messaging kind of reinforcing that in a way by saying, well, it's all really about the individual here.
Exactly.
And I'm kind of interested to see whether that is further reinforces the macro level discussion in any of the places you've mentioned.
In a way, yes. I think ultimately, from a more critical perspective, it depoliticizes the Christian worldview. Okay, that's how I would answer your question. For example, the books that we analyze, Aaron and I, for the project, the article about prosperity ethic, these pastors that we analyze would say, don't look at the government, don't blame the government, don't rely on the government. And they say that in so many ways, deliberately naming the government. That's part of your poverty mindset. Instead, take it upon yourself to improve yourself, to improve the fortunes of yourself. So obviously, it's a mutually reinforcing message on the part of the state. Hard work is good. On the part of the church, hard work is good. So so as both a citizen and as a religious individual, you get these two messages, and also from the school. So that's another institution that socializes you into this mindset. So in a way, it depoliticizes the Christian worldview. And I say this not just critically, but also in light of the long history of Christianity. Christianity was never depoliticized. It was. as theologians, church historians would show, and even in the brief history of Christianity in the Philippines, at least in the past, 30, 40, 50 years, Christianity was at the forefront of politics. But now it has to be relegated to the private side. Now let's make a distinction between politics and your private affairs. Do not blame the government. Hold yourself responsible for your fortunes. If you fail, that's on you. Along those lines. That's a good question, Luca. Thank you.
No, thank you. And now just to go to our first question in the chat box, perhaps linked somewhat. What's the position of charity within the spectrum of healing, wealth, and well-being?
No, brilliant. I thought this was a really good question. It varies, Nasir. What I'm going to say is that based on our data analysis, or personally my own research as well, it doesn't show up as much as you might expect it to, as part of the therapeutic culture, like just give and make yourself feel good about it. Obviously, these churches are into charity, and by that we can mean many things, right? Philanthropic work, responding to crisis situations, civil society action, and so on and so forth. So it's the whole thing, responding to catastrophes in other places. We know the churches are doing all of that. But is that the central message of the church? We can argue that that's not necessarily the central aspect of the church. It's a ministry of the church, but the very identity of the church doesn't talk about that. So you do an analysis of the messages, the sermons. For example, Makandiwa in Africa. It's not about charity per se. It's about, we gotta be rich. We gotta find meaning. You turn to Joel Osteen. It's about that. It's about being happy and fulfilling, achieving the change that you want to be. So it's a very self-oriented disposition. If charity would be there, it's a ministry, but I would suggest that it's not front and center. That's how I would put it. But it's there. It's not to deny that charity or outreach is not there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, next question is from Paul regarding the scandals that have been evident in some megachurches and the effect on congregants. If they see leaders being abusive or breaking the law, does it tend to undermine belief in the leaders and their message, or do they still buy into the health, wealth, and self-help message, even if they reject the leader? Yes.
Okay. This is a very interesting question, and thank you for asking that. To be honest, we can say that to a certain extent, yes, it has made a dent on the identity on the credibility of the church. But if we also look at the endurance of many of these churches, you name it, not just in Singapore. I know that to a certain extent it has affected one of the churches in Singapore, membership-wise, but they're still buoyant. You look at the churches, say, in the United States, and many of them have already been accused of so many scandals, money laundering, wealth, what sort. And to this day, these are very big issues, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of sex scandals and abuses. There's a very big church here that one big case blew up just a couple of weeks ago. But the churches endure. And I think partly because these are very big churches, mass exodus might be expected, but there are people who would stay, and those are people who are convinced that yes, maybe the person, the leader, has committed a mistake, and this is where the faith also comes in again, the theology comes in again, but maybe the mission of the church stands, maybe the mission of the stands. But having said that, it is also worth acknowledging and recognizing the impact on people, right? Those who have been abused, those who feel that they have been betrayed. What happens to them? Some of them just move to another church. Some of them leave their leave Christianity altogether, because to them this is the back, this is the unexpected consequence of putting their faith in that church. That in itself merits research, and personally I'm interested in that, in the succeeding permutations of my career. I'm very much interested in that. But for now, what we can also recognize is that these churches do endure, and I think part of it also has to do with being innovative. But it also is a wake-up call for many of these churches. How much of their religious life can really bank on the personality of one or two individuals? But that's a great point, because a great question. Thank you. Luca?
Thanks, Professor. All right, next question is, I think in two parts, or two related questions. Firstly, what has the megachurch and the prosperity gospel consumerism done to its Christian opponents? And similar to this, what backlash has there been to the prosperity gospel, especially in terms of double hermeneutic? Many preachers and clergy castigate consumerism and voluntarism and choice. And the questioner has asked for your opinions on how optimistic you are about the backlash.
Yeah, sure. Okay, those are two very difficult questions, Luca. That's from Hanway, I think. What has the megachurch and the prosperity gospel consumerism done to its Christian opponents? Hanway, I would love to know more where you're coming from and what your thoughts about this. But briefly, I would say that it has become an ammunition. One of the things, ammunition to critics of megachurch Christianity to begin with. So maybe these are the Christian opponents that you are thinking of, the very critics of megachurch Christianity. But at the same time, and this is where I'm coming in as a sociologist of religion who also has some sympathies to the faith community at large, okay, not just megachurches, I feel that these reflections, these scholarship, these writings are very important in pointing it out to them. It's like a mirror, being held up in the face of these faith communities. And sometimes they like what they see, sometimes they don't like what they see. And I think that to me is far more important. But having said that, I know that it becomes an ammunition. So for example, the big controversies that have emerged, say in Singapore, I know, and certainly here in the US, a lot of critics of these megachurches were really up in arms. But Hanway, I also want to say that these are not just your Christian opponents, meaning to say non-Christians, right? Many of them are also from within Christianity. Maybe those who do not subscribe to the prosperity gospel or to the therapeutic gospel, if you will. They use this as examples of what church should not be. And we know that in the past years, so many of these big leaders, without naming them, have been accused of so many big accusations about money laundering and even sexual abuses. And many critics, even Christian pastors themselves, have pointed out that this is what is wrong about megachurch Christianity that celebrates the pastor and not the gospel, if you will. Those are things that we hear, often from this. And I embed myself, in all these different criticisms because, again, it's part of my ongoing research. YouTube, for example, has a lot of these criticisms. The other question has to do with the backlash, right? I'm just trying to look for it again. What backlash has there been to the prosperity gospel and double hermeneutics? Many preachers and clergy castigate consumerism. Exactly my point, Hanway. So many preachers from the mainline denominations are using this, as a point of criticism against all these megachurches. In fact, even when I was still living in Singapore, I encountered many pastors from other established churches, the mainline denominations, who would say, "See, this is what's wrong. This is exactly why why these megachurches have been really treading on thin ice all this time. They're banking on so much wealth, and now it's been exposed. See, and just anecdotally, I don't have statistical data to back this up. They would tell stories about people moving away from the megachurch and joining their mainland denominations. So it's like they get converted, in megachurch Christianity, and then they find their way back to the mainland denominations after being disappointed in those megachurches. So that might be the backlash, if you will, if you want to put it that way. Thank you, Luca and Hanwei. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Next question from Hazik. Thank you very much for the detailed exploration of well-being in megachurches. From the perspective of followers of megachurches, does the association between faith and healing, wealth and happiness, permeate into their view of non-followers, who I suppose could be Christians who don't follow the same teachings, or non-Christians even, perhaps?
I see. Meaning to say, does it also influence the way they look at other people? Luca?
I think that's the question. Yes.
That could be it. Just now, right, in my presentation, I talked about how one of the churches, is it in California, would target the Black community, and in one sentence, associate them with laziness, and therefore they need to be more aspirational and they need to be more disciplined. That could be it, so this again, point of critical reflection on the part also of the faith community. How does this theology make them see those who are not like them? You're too lazy. Again, in the Philippine context, the poverty mindset, I've said that so many times, right, in the course of my presentation. These two preachers would blame Filipinos for being poor because of their poverty mindset, meaning to say they just borrow money, they don't save, they're lazy, they don't do what is they don't acquire the skills that they're necessary for them to succeed in the 21st century, investing in the stock market and so on and so forth. Obviously, so there it is, the theology, the faith conviction influences the way they look at the rest of the world. That is a problem in and of itself, because poverty, and as I have said in my conclusion, Luca, Muhammad Hazik, as I said in my conclusion, the poverty becomes the problem of the individual. But in places like, I'm very sure in Singapore also, but it's certainly in the Philippines, poverty is also structural. It affects certain people who are not able to access university education, for that matter. And those who have access university education, those who have finished university education, are they in the right industries, or are they gainfully employed, or they might be underemployed? So they are working very hard, only that the opportunities are not there. Is that a problem of laziness? Obviously not. It's much more structural. The theology of the prosperity theology and the therapeutic culture limits the ability of many Christians to see that poverty is also deeply structural. Thank you for that good question.
Thank you so much. All right, next question. Unbridled rage is a strong emotion that is gaining traction in our fast-moving world. What is the one advice the megachurch can offer to provide healing and empower those affected, especially the youth of today? And there's a second part. With the advancement of financial prosperity, would there be a higher possibility of corruption in megachurches? What are its innate teachings that could be used to safeguard against such corruption, if any?
Okay. You're putting me in so much trouble, aren't you? Right. But these are great questions, Muhammad bin Ali. Right now, so these are great questions. Okay, I know, and you're asking me, and right now I'm here in the US, and there are just too many. The polarization in this country is just it's just too much, and I say that as a Filipino who has gone through our recent elections, presidential election, and those also deeply highly polarized And with Marcos, becoming our president right now, was the son of our deposed dictator. So that was clearly polarizing for our society as well. And Christianity, in many ways, was also part and parcel of that polarization. Megachurches, even. We don't have time to unpack all of that. That's the book project that I'm working on here in the US, maybe for another conversation. But I would say that megachurches, I feel, have an opportunity to be spaces where I don't know how much they're able to do this, but I feel that megachurches have an opportunity because they attract a lot of people from different walks of life. Megachurches have that privilege of discussing issues, hardcore issues I hope, in a safe space, in a safe environment. Unfortunately, like many churches, even small churches, megachurches tend to only embrace just one religious worldview, and if the studies of our American colleagues are correct, then that has a very strong correlation with their political attitudes as well. And so therefore, the church has become echo chambers of both religious and political worldviews. There are no conversations across the line, so to speak. I have been pushing for, both as a scholar and as an engaged intellectual in the Philippines, to really have honest, deep, but safe conversations with people who do not believe like us, especially politically, in the light of Christian faith, in the light of theology. But it's a difficult thing, because it's a difficult thing to accomplish, because you already see the other as the enemy. Theologically speaking, he's not Christian enough, he's not believing enough, etc. That has to be false. That has to be bridged first and foremost. And I hope megachurches could become those spaces. Or maybe I'm too optimistic. And then the second question has about corruption. Can it be, to be honest, it's not so much about, I think, corruption in any church, not just megachurches, is not about being prosperity oriented per se. It's about accountability. Research shows this. If final accountability rests on the charismatic pastor, the question is, what happens if that pastor errs? To whom is that person accountable? And we've seen the pattern across many scandals around the world, not just in Singapore, but here, certainly in the US, some parts of the Philippines, Southeast Asia, Thailand. I know there's a megachurch there that underwent some tumultuous period a couple of years ago. It's about accountability. If they commit money laundering, to whom are they accountable? Is the board, for example, of elders strong enough to hold this leadership accountable? And again, without naming names, some of you might be familiar already with some of the big names that were taken to held accountable in the past 5 or 6 years. So again, it's about accountability, structures of accountability, the absence of which is going to foster more corruption of all kinds. Yeah, go ahead, Luca.
Thanks, Professor. I might just insert this question of accountability prompted another question, but only answer it if we have time. But I just you were making the comparison between therapy, the kind of sort of introspective exercises which megachurches are now doing, and how they could be akin to therapy. And I'm just kind of wondering, I guess it depends on the jurisdiction, but do you have any thoughts on the regulation or lack of regulation? Because obviously therapy would tend to be a medical intervention which is regulated, and yet I wonder what happens if people are giving a similar kind of advice in a religious setting.
Oh, interesting. I don't know. That's a good question. Is therapy regulated? I mean, there are psychologists, counselors have to be registered in some places. I know the Philippines, yes. Singapore, certainly, counselors need to be licensed. The US also. But I suppose that's a good question. I don't know how to answer it just yet. I think churches are free to do what they're doing, because they do not they do not present themselves as counselors, as licensed counselors. whereas counseling is a really as a professional task.
Mm.
Um, but just the same, the point that I am making is that the megachurch Christianity reinforces the therapy culture that you find not just in the workplace, not just in the school, but in many, many parts of society. Family counseling is part of them. And again, megachurch Christianity reinforces that. I think that's all I'm making. I'm not necessarily saying that megachurch Christianity is replacing.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Gerald Kong. What happens to followers of megachurches who try as hard as they may to be healthy, wealthy, and fulfilled in life, but simply do not succeed? Are they so sold into the prosperity gospel that they keep on trying to achieve these goals, or do they give up and finally protest this all as an illusion?
Hi, Gerald. It's good to see you here. Gosh, this is a tough question. This in itself demands research. Um, I am trying to develop a new project with a colleague of mine, a psychologist, about religious trauma. And we want to cover a wide array of different traumatic experiences. Usually it has to do with being LGBTQ plus or being a sexual minority in a conservative religious organization. But it could very well involve also other cases of abuses, financial, spiritual, pastoral, sexual, and so forth. What is particularly interesting about the theology of the therapeutic culture is that because the burden is on the individual, it is very likely, it is very, very much possible that the person feels that he or she does not have enough faith, or he or she does not feels that they do not have they're not disciplined enough, that they're doing a lot more. So this goes back to what I said about the therapeutic culture as a diagnostic ethos, that it's always about this ongoing incessant search for, okay, what's wrong with me and what do I need to do? The pastor said have enough faith or do this and do that. Okay, I need to continue doing that until I see its fruits. Has it backfired for some people? It has. It certainly has. We have a lot of stories. Research would show. Just recently, I supervised a thesis, a student about on this project and related to this, and people get tired. In the other book that I am writing right now, one of the words that we keep hearing is woundedness. That has to do with gender, but I think the pattern is similar. Being disillusioned. So, which is why I feel that, going back to the other thing that I said just now, that within these religious spaces, honest conversations about, okay, so what if it doesn't work? Am I still the problem? Or could there be other ways of looking at poverty, for example, or the difficulty of living in a place like Singapore, right? And I know this to be the case because this is not just a personal thing for me. I'm a couple of for my postdoc, this was more than a decade ago. I was doing my research in and on Singapore, and even then, a lot of the young adults that I talked to were expressing a lot of disappointments with life, being a young adult in Singapore, because life was just becoming more and more and more and more expensive. There's only so much that faith, could do to alleviate the suffering, if you will. Thanks, Luca, and thanks, Gerald.
Thanks, Professor. All right, the next question from Ed. Could you share more on your terms of reference and comparison for megachurches? For example, you mentioned the never-ending cycle of megachurch theology on self-fulfillment. What are the key differences in the theology of megachurches and the theology you are comparing to?
Oh yeah, no, this is a good question. Two ways to answer this. One is, are there alternative theologies apart from a therapeutic culture that you find in Christianity that could be a counterpoint, if you will? Yeah, I would say theology of suffering, liberation theology, or if you will, something much more neutral, for the lack of a better word, the theology of contentment. Is there such a thing? There is such a, if you think about it, and you find it in Certain religious denominations, some denominations, some mainline churches might do that. The Catholic Church, not all, but some of the Catholic parishes might preach that. Some Methodist churches might harp on that. You know, the theology of contentment and suffering and finding meaning in suffering. What is interesting about the therapeutic culture, as we discussed it, is that meaning is found in the acquisition of skills and improving your life and getting out of poverty and in your fruitful relationships in your family. Can meaning also be found in suffering? It's a theological question. It's a philosophical question, obviously, but it's also a theological question. Now, if it is a theological question, which churches talk about that? Do we find it also in megachurches? Some, yes. But from what we have discussed thus far, it's not a dominant feature. So that's one point of comparison that I would say. Or for me personally, I'm really very much drawn to liberation theology, like to treat suffering and poverty and inequality not as the problem of the individual, but as a problem of society. Like each one of us plays an important role in reinforcing or changing the structure so that people get out of poverty. It's another talk altogether, liberation theology, but I know it's also very controversial because it's often associated with Marxism. So, but it is what it is. Okay, and as juxtapose that against the never-ending cycle of self-fulfillment. It's about I'm always looking at how megachurches would innovate, you know, its projects. For this year, this is our theme. For next year, this will be our theme. For this quarter, this is going to be our set of activities. Next quarter, we're going to do more of this, and we're going to set up conferences and conventions and youth camps and activities and so forth. And if you analyze all the themes, it could be about finding your purpose or finding a meaningful partner or relationship, and so forth. Those are just examples. I feel that, and then they keep recurring. They keep recurring because new members do come in, and some people are still looking for their relationships. Some people who have been there for a long time are still looking for meaning in their lives, and it goes on and on. So in theory and in practice, we know that therapy is a never-ending process. And megachurches, in many ways, I feel, also replicate that pattern. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Professor. A question from Mr. Eric. So he says, interesting presentation. Does the approach taken with prosperity gospel or prosperity ethics affect relations between these megachurches and other Christian churches? So interchurch effects.
It depends on your society. I don't know about Singapore per se, but it might very well be in Singapore. Again, it's been a while since I was last in Singapore. I remember when I was doing my postdoc. I was doing my postdoc in Germany, but my research was in Singapore. So I was doing my fieldwork in Singapore, and one of my interlocutors, he comes from a mainline denomination, one of those more established churches, older churches in Singapore. So I had one question for him. So what do you think is the problem of Christianity in Singapore? And we were talking about something else. Without batting an eyelash, he said, megachurches. Megachurches are a problem in Singapore. Megachurches. So that is, this was a long time ago, but I would imagine it's still resonant for many people today, because especially at that time, the brouhaha, in one of the megachurches was really big, but it wasn't just this one person or one ordinary young adult that I talked to. Also pastors of another mainline denomination in Singapore that I talked to. So it could be that, it's about. It's an ironic thing, isn't it? The therapeutic culture is about diagnosing a problem and helping people solve their problems, but in reality, it causes more problems now in a wider context, in the interchurch relationships. In the Philippine context, there is a big organization called the Philippine Council of Evangelical Churches, PCEC. Some megachurches are there, but there are also a lot of small churches there, and they have conferences and they have events together. They come together. I think in those settings, I think it's just I may be wrong here, but I feel that the differences are just sidestepped so that conversations could happen. I'm very sure that they have a lot of disagreements theologically when it comes to these things. But having said that, if you want to go to the more progressive side of Christianity in the Philippines, you don't go to the churches that are part of PCEC or the Philippine Council of Evangelical Churches. You go to the churches that belong to the other council. It's called the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, NCCP. These are the more progressive churches. They're not the majority though, but they have very long-standing, affinities with more progressive theologies. And you can see that they are distinct from each other. Thank you. That's a great question.
Thanks, Professor. We have a question from Akmal, which might touch on some of the things you've talked about already, but if you have any other ideas, if you have any thoughts that come to mind, please share. And there's also an aspect of this question about rituals, I believe. So I'll just ask the question. Thank you for the presentation. As you've explained, the effects of neoliberalism and individualism on the forms of religiosities being engendered by the megachurches do seem palpable. Given this, could you speak more about how these have affected the kinds of rituals being practiced in services and mass, and wider devotee attitudes towards them? Do they start to see these rituals as important to the cultivation of the self, or do they see them as unimportant, inimical, as irrelevant traditions even in that regard?
I see. Okay, sorry, I'm not sure. I'm finding it here in the chat box. It might have been privately sent to you, Luca.
It's a question from Azi, A-Z-I.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Yes, so it's about perceptions of rituals, right? Is my understanding correct,
Yes, I
Luca?
think that's the main.
I see how the affected kinds of ritual being practiced with mass and wider devotee attention. I see. Okay, it's very possible, Azi. It's very possible. We have a lot of stories from. I'm sure research about this has been done already, but we need more of it. Movements, from megachurches to other churches, or so outward movements, from megachurches. Where do they go? Once they are disillusioned, do they go somewhere else? Do they just go out, leave Christianity? Do they find another places? And in some contexts, some scholars are optimistic about traditional Christianity once again, or ritualistic Christianity, if you will, once again, because they feel that many of these former members of megachurches get tired of the razzle and dazzle, the spectacle of megachurch Christianity, and then they're drawn back to, or they're drawn to, if it's their first encounter, to the smells and bells, if you will, of liturgical Christianity. So rituals have a big role to play, even in the wider religious marketplace, if I could put it that way. So so I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, Azi, but that's how I would address it. Because but the point is that within megachurch Christianity, at least from the time that if you look at the long history of megachurch Christianity, Donald Miller wrote a book in 1997 about new paradigm Christianity. Many of the megachurches in the United States that became megachurches in the 1980s and 1990s, they were born out of the Jesus movement in the 1960s. And as part of the hippie movement, if you will, or the Jesus movement, the revolutionary movement, anti-institutional, anti-establishment religious fervor. And for that reason, they got rid themselves of all the rituals. And so therefore we have the megachurches as we know them today. But interestingly, we're also seeing a movement towards traditionalism. I don't think it's significant enough to make a dent on megachurch Christianity, but there is that movement among people who are looking for I don't know, for a lack of a better word, deeper, a more closer engagement with rituals, maybe the Bible or theology. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think we're pretty much out of time, but I just wanted to acknowledge some questions from Mei Lee. For me, the heart and soul of Christianity is the fruit of the Spirit. All these virtues money cannot buy. So is the emphasis on money and material wealth misguided? Is it not true that love and true friendship, agape love, agape, are more important than material prosperity? And yes, comments, surely collective spiritual values count more than individual material values. Yes, please.
Yeah. Do you want me to respond as a sociologist or as
I think I just wanted to, if you have any immediate thoughts, either way is fine. But we are out of time, and I know people need to rush off, so no pressure. Actually, I just wanted to acknowledge the questioner.
Oh yeah, no. To be honest, these are questions that I hope my scholarship are going to generate. And thank you, Meili, thank you, Hanwei, for really bringing up this question, these very important points. At this point, I'm speaking as a sociologist, and I am presenting the data and my analysis. And I'm just hoping that these are the questions that you've raised, the reflections that you've raised, are the ones that will be raised within the faith communities. This is really my hope as a sociologist of religion, that it's like a mirror being held up. I feel that this is one of the responsibilities of scholars, especially scholars like myself who are really engaged in society and social issues. I don't want to be isolating myself from the rest of society, so to speak. And I also know, because my writings, I know, are being read by theologians, especially in my context. And so these are questions that I hope that would be entertained, hopefully by pastors themselves one day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Jayeel. Thank you so much for the presentation and the thorough engaging in our Q&A. Really appreciate your time.
No, I'm pleasantly surprised, and people stayed, Luca. Thank you so much, everyone. I really, really miss Singapore. I really do. I really miss, my favorite food is kway teow, which I haven't had in the past 5 years, and I'm still hoping to go back to Singapore soon.
It might be somewhere in the US, I guess.
No, not the US. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks on behalf of Paul and the SRP team.
Yes. Looking forward to meeting you all in person one day. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, some familiar names here. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.